Tractate Shabbos, Perik Chadosol, 11th chapter, and we're holding on page 102. Start with the Mishnah on top. We'll learn to above 67b. One brings a Chatas offering only for Ishgaga, for inadvertent violation of a Melacha. The following Mishnah elaborates on the degree of inadvertence necessary for Chatas liability. Within the shogeg itself, there is level of inadvertence. One who threw an object and then remembered that it was Shabbos after it left his hand, but before it landed. So in mid-air, he realized it's Shabbos, while the object is flying. Kolto acher, and another person caught it. Kolto Keleb, or a dog caught it, or shenisaf, or it was burnt. Patu is exempt from Chatas offering. Zohar class is Chabura. He threw the object on the Shabbos in order to inflict a wound. Bein ba'odom, bein bebeima, upon either a person or an animal. V'nizkar sheloi nasis Chabura, and he then remembered that it was Shabbos when the wound had not yet been inflicted. Patu is exempt from a Chatas offering. So, meaning he remembered that it was Shabbos before the wound was inflicted. Zaklal, this is the rule. Kol chayove chatois en chayove einon chayovin ad shetehe tchiloson v'seifon shugago. When is all who are liable to Chatas offerings are not liable unless the commencement of their misdeed and its completion were both an inadvertence, the beginning and the end. If the commencement of their misdeed was an inadvertence, didn't know it was Shabbos, or didn't know it's not allowed to do it on Shabbos, but its completion was a deliberate act. You realize while the object is flying, is not allowed to do it. Or the other way around. The beginning was intentional. Commencement of their misdeed was a deliberate act. But its completion was an inadvertence. Peturin, they are exempt. Unless the commencement of their misdeed and its completion were both an inadvertence. Okay, so the Mishnah stated in its first ruling that if one threw something in a public domain, then remember that it was Shabbos after it left his hand, and the object was intercepted before it reached the ground, he is exempt from a Chatos. This implies that he is exempt only because the object was intercepted. So the Gemara infers from this, but if the object landed without interference, the object was not intercepted, the thrower would be liable. But why should he be liable? Did he not remember that it was the Shabbos before the object landed? Utenan, we'll learn in our Mishnah, Kol chayav v'chatois, all who are liable to Chatos, einon chayovin ad she'tchilos and v'seifon shugog. Good morning, David. Welcome back. So, Kol chayav v'chatois, all who are liable to Chatos offering are not liable unless the beginning and the end were b'shogeg. But over here, the thrower should be exempt even if the object was not intercepted, even if the object landed, because the beginning was shogeg and the end was mazid, was deliberate. Amar Rav Kana Seifa Ason Lelachto Misna. In the Mishnah's letter clause, the rule that state that one is not liable to a Chatos unless both the beginning and the end of the act were inadvertent, we have come to the case of a clamp with a rope. What's a clamp with a rope? The case of someone who throws a clamp but continues to hold onto the rope that is attached to it. It's like those cowboys that are catching the lasso. So they're throwing something, they're still holding to the other side. This over here is a clamp, but he's still holding onto the rope. Since he can still retract the clamp before it lands by jerking the rope, I guess pulling it back, the completion of his transgression is not considered inadvertent unless he remained unaware of the Shabbos until after the clamp landed, which is not really likely to happen. Someone to remain unaware of the Shabbos until after the clamp landed. The Mishnah's first ruling, however, speaks of throwing an ordinary object, which cannot be retracted. The Mishnah spoke about a regular case, not with someone holding a clamp. Once it leaves his hand, that's it, cannot be retracted. Therefore, even if he remembered the Shabbos before the object landed, the act is considered a complete inadvertence, and it would be liable to chatos if not for the fact that the object was intercepted before it landed. So what they're saying is that the fact that the object cannot be retracted, then it's a complete shoygeg. Even though he realized that it's Shabbos after the object left his hand, it still remains shoygeg because there's nothing he can do about it. So he has to bring korban chatos because the beginning is shoygeg and the end is shoygeg. Even though at the end, while the ball is flying in the air, he understands that it's Shabbos and it's a problem, but there's nothing he can do about it. The object already left his hand. So if it was intercepted, they saved him from bringing korban because there was no resting. It was only akira. There was no anacha. But if the object was not intercepted, so then it was a complete shogeg, and he should bring a korban. To bring a shogeg, you have to comply to the requirement of beginning and end. That is a shogeg. The beginning of the act and the end of the act was shogeg. If it was halfway, shogeg and mezid, then you don't bring korban chatas. Lechto misno ogdo biyodu. The case of a clamp, lachto misno. Clamp with a rope attached. Clamp with a rope attached to it is one in which he still grasps the object in his hand, right? He's holding, like we said with the lasso, he's holding one side and he throws the other. He's exempt simply because he has not made a complete transfer. You see, that's a different case. He didn't make a complete transfer. And even if the entire act were considered inadvertent, it would still not be liable to chatos. This then cannot be the case to which the Mishnah rule refers. Say, no, it's a different case. This is a case that really the transfer is not completely done because you're still holding on to you're holding on to the clamp. So the Gemara says, so that was the second case that was mentioned in Mishnah. A case where he threw an object or he threw the clamp in order to inflict a wound, either on man or animal, not to transfer it from place to place. Consequently, the fact that he still grasps the object does not prevent him from being liable because the wound is going to be inflicted even though he's holding on to the clamp. Hanami Tineina, but this was taught as well in our Mishnah. If one threw an object on Shabbos in order to inflict a wound upon either a person or an animal. And he remembered that it was the Shabbos when the wound had not yet been inflicted. Potu, he is exempt from a chatos offering. Since the Mishnah explicitly teaches the law of one who throws to inflict a wound, the rule stated at the end of the Mishnah must be meant to add something else. The Mishnah rule refers to a case where one carries an object 4 amas in public domain. Since at any moment during the act he could refrain from completing the 4 amas transfer, he can stop. The completion of the act must be performed inadvertently to render him liable to chatos. He has to do it b'shegeg. V'hazeh haklal. In the top on 102.82, top right, v'hazeh haklal l'ketanya azrika ketanya. When the Mishnah said this is the rule, it said it in connection with throwing. Now, if an ordinary case of throwing where the object is completely released, leaving your hand, remembering the Shabbos in mid-flight does not exempt the thrower, the Tana should not have stated the general rule concerning the exemption for remembering the Shabbos in mid-act in regard to an unusual case of throwing. Since he does do so, we must conclude that the rule stated by the Mishnah refers even to ordinary cases of throwing, where the object leaves the thrower's hands entirely. The Mishnah's first clause teaches 2 cases as follows. 1. One who threw an object and then remembered that it was Shabbos after it left his hand, but before it landed. Inami lo nizka uklot acher. Or in a case where the thrower did not remember that it was the Shabbos, but another person caught it. Oy kolto kelev, or a dog caught it. Oy shenisrefo, or it was burnt in flight. Potu, he is exempt from the chatas offering in the first case because he was reminded of the Shabbos before it landed. And in the second case, because it was intercepted or landed in a dog's mouth or in a fire. According to this explanation, one who remembers the Shabbos after throwing the object, now he doesn't know Shabbos. Once the object leaves his hand, suddenly he knows it's Shabbos. Is exempt in all cases, even if he could not retract it. Why? Because the entire transfer did not take place while the thrower was in a state of unawareness. In order to be liable to chatas, you have to be in a state of unawareness throughout the whole time. That's a complete shogeg. The Gemara gives another explanation of the Mishnahs according to which the first ruling deals with a single case. The Mishnah's text is lacking, and this is what it is really teaching. One who inadvertently, by shaking, he throws an object, and then remember that it was the Shabbos after it left his hand, but before it landed. Kol to acher, somebody caught it, or kol to kelev, or a dog caught it, or shenisav, or it was burnt. Potu, he's exempt from chatas offering. But this implies that if it landed, he is liable. In regard to what case is this said? In regard to a case where the thrower then forgot again before the object landed, rendering it a case in which both the beginning of the malacha and its end were an inadvertence. But if he did not forget again before it landed, he is exempt, even if it landed properly. Why? Shekol chayov chatois ein chayovim anshet chilosim v'seifon shgog. In order to be liable to korban chatos, you have to be in the beginning of the act and the end of the act. Throughout the act, it has to be b'shoigeg. It has to be with inadvertence. Zaklal kol chayov chatois. All who are liable to chatos offerings. Gemara discusses a case of one who began a melacha inadvertently, then remembered, and then forgot again before completing the melacha. Itmo, shtei amas b'shegeg, shtei amas b'mezid, shtei amas b'shegeg. One transport an object in a public domain, the first to ames inadvertently, the next to ames deliberately. Okay, halfway shegeg, halfway b'mezid. Rabbi Omar Potu, Rabbi says he's not liable, he's exempt. Rabbi Omar Chayav, Rabbi without the dot in the vase, with a vase, Rabbi Omar Chayav. So Rabbi and Rabbi. Rabbi says he's exempt, Rabbi says he is liable. Again, the case is halfway shegeg, halfway mezid. Rabbi Omar Potu, Rabbi said he's exempt. Rabban Gamliel, even according to Rabban Gamliel, the Omar in Yediyah lechatzishiur. There's no such a thing according to Rabban Gamliel. Awareness for half a measure. Either you have awareness or you don't. Also, only there in the case of writing that he says, since when the measure required for liability is completed, it is completed inadvertently. But here, where the required measure of 4 amis is completed deliberately, it starts off with shegeg, but it ends off with mezid. You would not say so. Rather, you would exempt him based on the person's awareness at the time the measure is completed. The Gemara clarifies the type of transfer Rabbah is discussing. And in regard to what type of transfer was Rabbah speaking? If it was in regard to someone who throws an object, shegegu, then he was an inadvertent transgressor, since he could no longer prevent the object from traveling further. You can't stop it. Once it left your hand, you throw it. That's it. Why should he not be subject to chatos? So in a case of zerek, you should be liable to chatos because it's seemingly the beginning and the end are shegeg. Ela b'mayvi. Rather, you must say that Rabbah was speaking a case of someone who carries an object for amis in the public domain. Since he can stop, this guy can stop when he completes the fourth amma. He has completed the 4 amma measure deliberately. So Rabbi Omar, and therefore Rabbi says he's potter. Rabbi said he's chayav. Why? Even according to the sages, who said that there is an awareness for half a measure. Also, it is only where it is the writer's in the writer's control. You're writing something, you can stop. You can stop before you write the second letter. Whereas here, it is not anymore in the person's control to prevent the object from continuing on. They would not say this. Rather, the sages would agree that he is liable in spite of that awareness, because you can't stop it in a case of throwing an object. Mara clarifies the type of transfer being discussed by Rav. In regard to what type of transfer is Rav speaking, in regard to if he's speaking about a case of someone who carries with his hand. It's in his hand, he can stop. It is in his control. Then it is certainly in his control. Rather, Rav is speaking a case of regard to one who throws an object. Since he can no longer stop it from traveling 4 amos, His awareness after the object was airborne does not divide the throw into two inadvertent acts.
So, okay, first, the person is writing letters, he can stop with writing one letter. The God is Karen can stop before he gets to 4 amas, but if you throw the ball, it's out of your control.
Correct. It says, look at 27, it says, this does not contradict the principle taught by Rava above, that awareness before the thrown object lands exempt the thrower from a chatas. For the exemption in that case was not because the awareness divided the throw into two acts, but because the conclusion of the single act of throwing has been legally rendered deliberate. The end was deliberate because he already knew that it's Shabbos, or he knew that it's forbidden on Shabbos. And in the words of the Mishnah, there is no chatos for an act unless both its beginning and end were inadvertent. This is indeed the point taught by Rav Ashi above. It emerges from the Gemara's explanation of the different cases of which Rabba and Rava speak, that Rabba and Rava do not in fact argue. Rather, the ruling was stated in different cases, and each agrees with one another. Amar Rabba, parentheses or brackets, Rava, Zorak v'nocho b'fi ha'kelev or b'fi ha'kivsh. One threw an object 4 amas in a public domain, and it landed in the mouth of the dog or in the fire, the opening of a furnace, and was consumed by flame. Chayav is liable. So Gemara says, 1 second, V'anante nan kol to'acher. We learned that if somebody intercepted it, someone caught the object, or kol to kelev, or someone intercepted, or dog intercepted, or shenisa v'potu, that he should be exempt because the beginning was shegeg and the end was mazid. Or you can say because he never completed the act. So why over here Rava says he's liable? The Gemara says also the thrower does not intend for the object to land in the dog's mouth or in the fire. Therefore, he's potu. But in this case, where we said that he's liable, here, however, Rava discusses a case where the thrower intends for the object to land in one of these places, in the mouth of the dog or in the fire, and an intended target attains the legal status of a surface for tfochim wine. So from here you learn that if you actually threw something and it reached, it did exactly what you wanted,
okay, like
it's worse.
Throwing it to the dog on purpose, because you know the dog.
Throwing it to the dog, he catches it.
Yeah, the dog's always going to catch it, because that's what dogs do. I mean, like my brother's dog, he's always going to catch the ball. So, and the fire, you're throwing the fire,
So then you're going to be liable.
So wait a minute, why are you a chatas? So then you'd be chayv misa, right? Because you didn't.
No, but the beginning was shogeg.
So the beginning, you didn't, but you meant to throw it, but you threw it, so you meant to throw it, but you didn't know it was Shabbos. That's what you're saying.
Either you didn't know it's Shabbos, or you didn't know you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. And then in midair, you remember that it's Shabbos.
Way, if you know it's Shabbos and you know it's usher to throw it, then you throw it, then you're chayv misa.
Yeah, but in this case, he's liable to chatas.
Because he didn't have the two elements. He didn't
No, if he had.
He didn't know it was Shabbos, or he didn't know he shouldn't throw the ball. Okay, I got it.
No, but what he's saying now, that if you throw an object, you didn't know it was Shabbos, and the dog caught it, you're not liable. But if that was your intention, that the dog will catch it,
right,
then you are liable.
Right. Like I said, if I'm throwing the ball to my brother's dog, he's always going to go for it. she's always going for it.
Yeah, unless you really throw it hard, then it can't.
And she could still catch it. She can something else that dog. But anyway, that's another story for another day.
I'm a Rabbi. Afanan Nami Tanina. We've also learned this in a Mishnah. Yesh oichel achilo achas. There's a case of one who performs a single act of eating. He eats a single olive volume of food. V'chayav leo arba chatois ve'oshom echad. It could be a case where someone is eating just one olive volume and will be liable to 4 chatas, 4 offerings, and 1 guilt offering. What is the case? The case of a tome she'ochal chelev. A tome person, someone is in a state of impurity, who ate chelev, he ate the forbidden fat.
So it's a double whammy.
1 second, it's not the end of it. And that chelev was noiso min ha-mekudoshin. That chelev, he didn't just eat chelev that he's not allowed to eat. He ate chelev that was left over from from the consecrated offerings. And he ate it on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, I know. I would make one of these big things.
So he did all these things. Now, eating chelev, you're not allowed to. In state of Tumah, you're not allowed to eat anything that is consecrated. And you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Meir says, Shabbos, additionally, if it was Shabbos, adding on top of it, so it's Shabbos and Yom Kippur. Okay, so if it was Shabbos and he carried it out in his mouth before swallowing it, he walked around with it, chewing it. He walked from private domain to public domain, or vice versa. Chayav is liable to a 5th chatas offering for desecrating the Shabbos. Amrulei, so they just say to Rabbi Meir, Eino min Hashem. This is not in the same category. This sacrificial obligation does not come for the same reason as the others. It says in 37, it is not an obligation resulting from the sin of eating, but from the sin of carrying. An altogether different type of transgression. The Tana was discussing only the sins on account of eating. Okay, so Bivi analyzes the last ruling to demonstrate his point. But why should one be liable for carrying out a piece of food in his mouth? This is not the normal method of taking out. For people generally do not transport objects in their mouth. Since he intended to eat the food while walking between domains, machshavtei meshavyali mokim. His machshava, his intent, makes his mouth a normal place for transfer. So his intent makes his mouth a normal place for transfer to take place in. Achanami, therefore, here too, kevan the kamikaven, since the thrower intends for the object to land in a dog's mouth or in the fire, machshavtei mishavel mokim, his intent makes it a legally significant place, equivalent to 1 or 4 tefachim wide. We shall return to you, Hazorik. We shall return to the chapter 11, chapter Hazorik. We'll start chapter 12, which the name of the chapter is Aboine. Aboine, the builder, one who builds. Aboine kama even v'yechav. How much you need to build to be liable? The Gemara says, Aboine kolshu, one who builds any amount. V'amesatis, and similarly one who chisels a stone. V'amaki bepatish u'v'matzot, strikes the final blow with a hammer or with a sledgehammer. What's the difference between a hammer and a sledgehammer?
Sledgehammer is
I guess a bigger one.
Big thing.
Akoideach, or drills. Kol shu, any amount, chayav, is liable. Ze haklal. This is the rule. Kol ha'isem melocha u'melachta miskayemes. Anyone who performs labor, and his labor endures, it's going to last. Be Shabbos, if he does it obviously on Shabbos, chayav is liable. Chen Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer. So I guess you're doing something that is permanent, that it's going to last.
Right.
It's like sometimes just tying a screw. Let's say a door handle, right? A door handle, it's loose, and you just tie the screw.
Right.
That's it. It's now fixed. You don't have to worry about it.
I did that for my mother during the week.
Yeah, but if you do it on Shabbos, it's a problem.
Hi, how are you? How you doing?
So
Shalom Aleichem.
So it says, Rabbi Gamliel Eimer, V'chen Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Eimer, Av hamakeh b'kunas hasadam b'shem meloch chayav. Also, one who strikes with a hammer on the anvil.
Anvil. It's a big metal thing, and you put the whole thing down, you bang on it.
While working is liable, because he is like one who improves the work.
You do a lot with the horseshoes.
Yeah. Right. But I think in general, somebody, the shoemaker, they have this because they're using it as a base to work on.
Right, and then they're banging things and making them.
Right. So the Gemara questioned the Mishnah's first. For what is building of any amount fit? What does it mean? You have to do something significant. What does that mean? Any amount? For indeed, a poor person digs a small hole to store his copper coins in it. The Chavos Gav Mishkan, a similar thing was done in connection with the construction of the Mishkan. Those who sewed the curtains for the Mishkan would also sometimes dig a small hole at to store their needles in it.
Yeah, okay.
So this melacha existed in the Mishkan. So you can see over here that a small melacha, that's what Rabbi Menashe says, a small melacha can also be considered as a melacha, even if it's something minute. Abayom, kevan, the mishtaki, the needles would rust if they were stored in the ground. You leave it in the ground for a while, it's going to rust. Lo of the ochi. Lo of the ochi. The craftsman who sewed the Mishkan curtains would not do this. Ella, rather, we find another case of minimal construction that is useful. She can only pitpute kir ktana. A pauper crafts a stand for a small stove, lishpois oleo kedero ktano, to set upon it a small pot of food. The Chavos or Gabe Mishkan, a similar thing was done in connection with the construction of the Mishkan. When the ones who cooked herbs to dye the curtains were missing some dye for their work, they would craft a stand for a small stove to set up on it a small small kettle of dye to missing a little bit, so they would make it. There was no manifestation of poverty in a place of opulence, such as the Mishkan.
Okay.
It says in 15, those constructing the Mishkan never limited their production of an item to the precise amount they would need, but initially prepared enough to spare. Ella, so the Mishkan was a place of opulence, a place of ashirus, of wealth. Ella, rather, we find another case of minimal construction that is useful. Sheken Baal Habayis sheyesh lo nekev bevirosei v'sosmoi. Homeowner who has a hole in the wall of his mansion, seals it with clay. The Chavos or Gabe Mishkan, a similar ruling was done in connection with the construction of the Mishkan. Sheken Keresh Shenoflu Bei Dargo, for indeed there was a plank on which a worm fell and bored a hole. Mativ Leseicho Ovo Veseitma, a craftsman would pour molten lead into the hole and seal it. Amoshmuel Amitzades Even Chav, one who positions a stone in the ground is liable. It's a small, seemingly a very minute melacha, positioning a stone in the ground.
Right.
One sets a stone in the ground and works it in until it is level and held firmly in place.
Is this connected to why you don't do jigsaw puzzles on Shabbos?
Yeah, it is, because the point is that even a small melacha creates liability.
Right.
And if one person sets the stone in place to build a wall, put the first stone in the wall, and the second one adds the cement, the one who adds the cement is liable. There's no liability for merely setting the stone in place. How could Shmuel say that he's liable just for putting the stone?
The cement is a finishing touch.
According to your reasoning, look at this the end of the same. Consider the end of the same bite. Even if one lifted a stone and placed it on top of a row of stones, he is liable. A person is liable even for setting stone down without positioning it on the ground. How will you explain Rabbi Yossi's novel's ruling? Whether there are 3 stages of building in the building of a wall. Relating to the bottom row of stones, the middle row, and the top row. The bottom row needs only positioning and wedging in earth. Metzio boy nami tino. The middle rows also need cement to hold them in place. Iloi banocho balmo. And the top row is built with mere placement. The 3 ruling of Shmuel, the Tanakama, and Rabbi Yossi refer to these 3 stages of building and are thus not contradictory. 3 stages of building.
So any one of those 3 stages in your chayiv chatas.
Mm-hmm.
Putting this thing, the first one at the bottom. Okay.
So then there's another case of mesatis. Mesatis is chiseling. Mesatis mishum mai michai. Why is he liable? Rav Omar mishum boine. Rav said he's liable on account of building. Shmuel Omar mishum makir bepati. Shmuel said he's liable on account of striking the final blow. Concerning one who makes a hole in a chicken coop. Why would he do that?
Let the chickens down.
To give them some air.
Wow.
Right? The reference to wooden coop that has no window, it is necessary to make a small perforation near the top so that the fumes generated by the droppings will escape and not harm the chickens.
Okay, then these stinks in there, with or without alcohol.
So Rav Omar Mishum Bainu, Shmuel Omar Mishum Makir Patish. So Rav said he's liable because on account of building. Shmuel said he's liable on account of striking the final blow. Al Shufta Bekupina Demo, one who wedged a peg in the cavity of a hoe. So he stuck a peg into the ground. Rav Omar is liable an account of Boine Mishum Boine Shmuel Mishum Makir Patish. Again, Shmuel said he's liable because account of striking the final blow. Utzri Chadiash V'in Kamaita, for if we had been informed of the dispute only concerning the first case, chiseling a stone, he would have said, Ba'idikol Rav, in this case, Rav says the person is liable for building. Why? Mishum Derech Binyan B'chach, because this is the usual manner of building. Aval but regarding one who makes a hole in a chicken coop, where this is not the usual manner of building, I would say that he agrees with Shmuel that the person is liable for striking the final blow and not for building.
So what's the difference?
Both of them is liable. The question is what liability, why? Rav and Shmuel, one says building and one says makir patish. If he had been informed of the dispute only concerning the second case, he would have said, in this case, Rav says the person is liable for building. Because his act is similar to the usual manner of building, that he makes the hole for ventilation. But with regard to wedging a peg in the cavity of a hole, similarly, this is not even similar to the usual manner of building. So I would say, since it's not the usual manner of building, maybe I would say that he agrees with Shmuel that the person is liable for striking the final blow and not for building. And the other way around also. And if we had been informed of the dispute only concerning the last case, we would have said, Shmuel. In this case, Shmuel said that the person is liable for striking the final blow and not for building, because his act is
not analogous.
Is not analogous to building. In regard to those first two cases, I would say that he agrees with Rav. It was therefore necessary to state the dispute in all three cases. It says in number 30, even if we have been informed of the dispute concerning the first and third case, chiseling a stone and wedging a peg in a hole, we could not have deduced the opinion of Rav and Shmuel concerning the second case, striking a hole in a chicken coop. Perhaps the case as well as has a dissimilarity to the usual manner of building.
Let's say, okay, like in New York, the weather goes up and down, right? So during the week, it was cool, and he said, all right, the chickens are okay. All of a sudden, on Shabbos, it ends up being a hot day, and the chickens are going to die or whatever, and from the whole thing, and then you got to put a hole in the thing. So you're chayiv. I guess you could just let the door open and let the chickens go out.
Yeah. The goal free range.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of different situations that, you might feel like you're forced to do something for the chickens.
Right. Like you're allowed, for example, to milk the cow.
Exactly.
Shabbos.
So therefore, you think, well,
if you can use the milk, but you're not to milk it, because if it's your cow,
right,
because of the pain that it would suffer.
Right.
So you're allowed to let the chickens out because of.
Right. So.
But there's a whole thing about Shabbos. If let's say yolk chickens, when you catching a chicken, is it considered side or not? Is it hunting or not?
Yeah.
Capturing.
I mean, in chickens usually, if your chickens, they'll stick around.
You decide to play with them, or you decide to play with your dog on Shabbos, and you catch it. Is it union of side, of capturing or not?
No, but even petting it.
I'm not saying it's this or that way, but it's saying that it's a question.
I mean,
what?
They say even handling an animal on Shabbos is a malaka.
The question whether you. But I know that you're allowed to milk your cow.
But I'm saying,
because it has a lot of tsar, it has
let's say
pain.
You had a cat, so you're not supposed to pet the cat on Shabbos, even though the cat comes up to you.
but I don't know if it has to do with tzayid though, because it's just a chayat male, because it's not a kosher animal.
All right.
Anyhow, so it says, "V'aminir Ravi Nosson v'Arishayo Rabbi Yochanan." Rabbi Nosson v'Arishayo inquired of Rabbi Yochanan, "Mesatas mishumai chayav." On account of which av melacha, if one chisels the liable. Ach Rabbi Yochanan demonstrated to him with his hand is an account of striking the final blow, completing the job. One who chisels the stones and one who strikes the final blow with a hammer is liable. This implies that chiseling is not included in the category of striking the final blow. State that the Mishnah is as reading one who chisels a stone, who strikes the final blow with a hammer. It means to teach that one who chisels a stone violates the malacha of striking the final blow.
Yeah, but could it be in the middle of the job? I don't know.
One who chisels a stone, who strikes the final blow with a hammer, it means to teach that the one who chisels a stone violates the malacha of striking the final blow. Rabbi Yochanan concurred with the opinion of Shmuel cited above. The Gemara now issues another challenge to this view. Come learn Tashma, refutation to this view from our Mishnah, which states, so we'll discuss this tomorrow, God willing.
Okay, let's take a sculptor. A sculptor, it takes a lot of chiseling to make a statue.
Right.
So I mean, it'd be in the middle of the job.
Right.
So it's not the final blow.
What if it's the final blow for that stage? The stages.
Okay, all right, you got me there.